Okay, hello. So today I have another lovely guest with me, my friend, Carolyn O'Laughlin. And she also recently, well, I guess not so recently now, but is a,
Couple years now, yeah.
yeah, has gotten her PhD. And you specialize, like, what was the actual title of your PhD, your dissertation, if you will?
Sure. So my dissertation, I studied the actual title was like acts of resilience and resistance. Autistic college students identify, I don't know, experiences that led to their persistence. So essentially, what
Okay.
I did is that we have a lot of information about. Well, we don't necessarily have a lot of information about autistic college students, but what we do have is often from a deficit lens and is often
Mm,
about the challenges that autistic students face in college, and like the ways that they don't fit. Right. And so as a
sure.
student affairs professional for a bajillion years, I often found that I was in trainings, et cetera, where when we talked about autistic students, we really talked about like kind of how they might be disruptive in the classroom,
Mm,
or how autistic students kind of might be gumming up the works in the conduct system, right? Because they don't understand the social like there were these
sure.
things. I kept getting these messages, and in my own life and in my own family, um, I have neurodivergent kids. So I am neurodivergent. Um, and I'm queer. And so I kept like, I didn't feel well to me always when I heard these things, right? I had
Sure.
this like, eh. And then there was a point at which it kind of clicked for me that it felt the same as as when I was coming out in the 90s, right? And I had very
Ah,
well-intended, very kind, well-intended people who told me to like tone it down, you
sure.
know, like
Okay.
you don't have to be super queer, like maybe just
Right.
tone it down. Or like how hard would it be for you maybe not to be, you know?
Right,
Your
right,
life would be
right.
easier if you weren't, if you acted in this other way.
Sure.
Um, and so, man, I really saw that connection. And so that's why it's of particular interest to me is like my own identity stuff,
Sure.
around neurodivergence and around, you know, queer stuff, but and in my own family. But really it's that like, man, all of these messages that we get that is like the real you is maybe not palatable to people. So
Sure.
how do you change that?
Yeah.
Um, and there's some truth to like you got to know how to navigate the world, but you also
Yeah.
have to know what walls to knock down, right? You also
Sure.
have to know, um, both as an individual and as an agent of institutions, right? Like what's my
Yeah.
responsibility in both of those things? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I remember for myself, when I came out, that was way back in the early 90s as well. And
Right.
like the message was what? Tolerance, right? Like, oh,
Right.
we must
Right.
tolerate. And
Right.
so the reason I wanted you
To
on,
some
the
degree we can
reason.
tolerate you to a degree. Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's not as bad as you thought. So just hang on for a minute. Here's some quick tips to, yeah. But
Yeah.
the reason I wanted to have you on is because in a previous training, and we were specifically talking about stress management, we were talking about energy management. One of the participants bravely volunteered that for them, they really needed to be on top of managing their stress because if not, because they were
Mhm.
neurodivergent,
Mhm.
the the impact just would quickly make them kind of spiral out, if you will. That
Right.
was not
Right.
their
Right.
phrasing.
Right. 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 Right.
But like they would really like if they're not on top of it, it gets on top of them much more quickly than someone who is neurotypical, which I thought,
Hmm.
wow,
Hmm.
that's something I've never talked about on the podcast and nor am I an expert at. So let's bring someone on who can talk about it. How can folks work. And it's nice too, because you have that experience on the student affairs side and have only recently
Right.
pivoted to the faculty side.
Right.
And now, of course, you've done a bunch of research on this topic, which
Right.
is
Right. Right.
plus your lived experience. So I'm like,
Right.
ooh,
Right.
this will be perfect because then you can kind of talk about the impact this has on supervision in general, whether it be someone who's listening who is neurodivergent and like, oh, I want to be a supervisor
Right.
and I want to move up, and I feel like there's kind of a glass ceiling there,
Right.
or
Right.
for folks who are supervisors currently and are neurotypical, and you're like, I want to be more supportive, but I don't know what that really looks like.
Right.
So, to start us off, can you tell us, like, when we're talking at like neurodivergence is just, a trendy
Sure.
woke term at this point, but what does it really encompass? Like what are we talking about here?
So, okay. So neurodiversity is a term, like a big umbrella term that talks about like the diversity in the ways that people's brains work. And that includes all sorts of brains, right? So people who have kind of run our institutions and wrote all of our policies and procedures, like they fall under the neurodiversity umbrella because their brains work in a way too, right? But neurodivergent is kind of the smaller part of an umbrella, right? Where um, people whose brains work in ways that differ
Mm,
or are shifted from um, this typical, I don't even like the word typical, but that is the word, right? In these
sure.
like
Yeah.
typical, in kind of neuronormative ways.
Okay.
So that can include like autistic folks. My study was particularly around autism. I've also done some recent work around ADHD, but it also includes things like dyslexia and dyscalculia. It includes things like Tourette's. It includes things like bipolar disorder or anxiety. I mean, there's all sorts of things where people's brains are just wired
Mm,
in different ways, right? And so, like a stimulus makes a different thing happen in my brain that does in your brain, etc. Now that's true. There is a diversity of that overall, but we can't forget the structural power systems that are in play, right? And so
sure.
the rules that have been written, the ways that like, it is people in a privileged position, neuronormative people who have kind of identified what is normal. And so then if you're not that, we kind of
Eh,
blame those folks, and we don't really think about necessarily the fact that those voices may have been left out of the making of the rules, right, for the way
sure.
that we live.
Right,
So, and
right.
that's true around all sorts of issues of diversity, but
Sure.
neurodiversity, that is how I try to kind of explain it. Does that make
Interesting.
sense?
It does. Yes, 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 yes. Okay. So obviously I am oh yes, you were gonna say I could tell
Well,
something popped into your brain there.
yeah. Okay. So a lot of the work around, now I'm going to speak specifically around autism because that's kind of like my wheelhouse the most, right? But it is around a lot of neurodivergence. Okay.
Mhm.
But some Milton in 2012 did a D Milton, I don't remember the first name, did a study around autism. For many years, all of what we've known about autistic people has come from the counseling realm, right?
Mm,
And so has come from psychology, counseling, and kind of deficit laden information, right? People don't do this well, etc. So we had some big assumptions about autism. We had some assumptions that people with autism can't read others' perceptions, right? That they
mm,
just like that there's no way that they can do that. Um, that's a theory of mind thing, right? That they can't take on different people's
mm.
perspectives. My experience has not been that there's a lack there. In fact, that there is like high awareness as to how people perceive me or perceive
Mhm.
uh, because the world tells you how you're perceived, right?
Sure.
But there's like a lack of match. So anyway, Milton did the study that said, I think this theory of mind thing isn't quite right. I don't think it is that, or it's about both perceptions, like social cues, but also about communication, right? I
Sure.
do not think it's that autistic people necessarily lack the ability to communicate, or that misunderstanding between autistic and non-autistic people is in the way that we understand it. Current misunderstanding is attributed to the autistic person, like that person,
Mhm.
they didn't get it, they didn't understand.
Sure.
It's a deficit with them. But often the non-autistic person also does not understand, right? So it's not so much
Ah.
that I if I'm an autistic person, it's not so much that I misunderstand as much as it is that I am also misunderstood. And so we're both
Mm.
missing. But
Sure.
what Milton calls the double empathy problem, which is that we're both missing, but both the person who's missing the information, right, the neurotypical person or the non-autistic person in the exchange, thinks, oh, they didn't get it. And when you
Uh,
zoom out and the bigger world looks at the situation, the bigger world also says, like, oh, they didn't get it, right?
mm,
And but
yeah.
at no point are we saying like, how could we get it, right? Like, how do
Right.
we? How might we rethink that?
Yeah.
So that's what I tried to do was address that, like, but help me to understand more. What was that experience for you? Why was that different for you? What was that about? So that I could try to help us get it a little bit more,
Sure.
like
Yeah.
translate that a bit.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting because I won't say that I've always thought this, but it's my nephew also has autism. And like my sister says that, because this idea of not being able to read social cues, like she's
Right.
like, he is the most empathetic of all my children. Like he knows how people feel and he doesn't have any
Hmm.
problem like knowing that someone's upset, even if they're pretending they're not to be and that sort of thing.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Um, but I often like as my understanding of this topic has evolved and looking at how like because we neurotypical people think like, oh yeah, me know emotions good, me communicate good, and we are real bad at it. Like, like if you just look at how many couples counselors and how many
Right.
conflicts there are at work just involving neurotypical people, like we are just as bad, but in a different way. I think part of it is maybe privilege. Like I like, like
Hmm.
using the
Hmm.
term privilege. Like we feel like because there's been so much information about deficit, like, oh, well,
Hmm.
they're not going to get it. They're not going to get it. We're
Right.
like,
Right.
well, I'm the person who gets things. So now I'm
Right.
like, hey there, you. But like,
Right.
no, we don't get things all the time. We
Right.
like we read an email and lose our GD mind only to go
Right.
back after 2 days of being outraged to go, oh, I missed a couple keywords there. Oopsie.
Right. Right. Like maybe they
My
weren't just
bad.
total assholes, right? I'm sorry, but
Right.
yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's super interesting. And I was going to say that, like, obviously, Strengths University, and I'm a Gallup certified strengths coach. So this very much seems to me like, because the whole philosophy of strengths is what would happen if we looked at what was right with people. So instead of what's the deficit,
Right. Right.
what
Exactly.
what does this thinking in different ways actually bring to the table? Because honestly, like if neurotypical people, which are the majority, were doing such a crack up job, we would have solved way more problems than, we wouldn't
Yeah.
have like as many problems because, oh, our wonderful neurotypical brains just, we solved them all.
Yeah. Well, it's, I mean, I think it's hard because so many things are invisible. Like the privilege
Mm,
of neuronormativity is invisible in a lot of ways, right? So,
mm,
for example, I mean, if we think about like universal design, and it doesn't have to be universal design. If we think about design, there is
sure.
an acceptable level of noise. There's an acceptable
Mm,
decibel level of noise that the world finds unproblematic, right?
mm,
But if your brain works differently and you are somebody who processes sensory information like noise,
hmm.
you hear it louder. You
Right.
cannot, the like you cannot perhaps your brain does not separate that background noise of the cafeteria or the
Sure.
traffic outside. Like um, that has more of an impact on you than you think.
Right.
When I put on my socks and shoes, like I myself am a little sensitive about some of these things. There are socks that are dead to me, right? Like I'm never
Mm,
going to wear those socks. I don't know what is the deal, that why do they always feel sliding around, whatever, right? Um, but if I am walking and every step I feel that slidey sock, right? Like I was unable
yeah.
to turn that out. That's a lot of information that's there.
Sure.
So, but in our work, in our workplaces, um, there's a lot of things that we want to assume are like that's not a problem. It's not,
Mm.
open concept offices are not a problem because we said so. But in fact, they're a problem
Right.
for a lot of people, right?
Sure.
Open concept problems are not a problem because they're cheaper to build, right? Right? Which is really what it is about. But we act as though it's about something else. Um, they're more modular, like the pros are just so high. But in fact,
Right.
are they? I mean,
Sure.
even when we bought our house, we thought about that, right? Because when we bought our house in 2000, well, this house is the only house I've ever bought. But when we bought it in 2016, and at first they were showing us some new builds that were like it felt like it was all one room, and I was
Mm.
like, oh yeah, no one in our house. This is not. No.
Right. Right.
Like
Right.
we need to be able to shut a door so that somebody can have a conversation and pay attention. Like we are
Sure.
all just so distracted, like in my family, right? That we're all just so distracted that that would not, somebody would be doing the dishes and I would have to have a full on tantrum about it, right? So when the
Right.
person says, when your person says, yeah, I have to be conscious of that stress, when you think about all of that additional stress that is happening for
Mm.
people because the
Right.
way that they process the senses around them, right? Because of the noise,
Sure.
because of the lights, etc. And so I think sometimes people think like you're being drama about that, right? You're being drama
Right.
about your
Yeah.
overhead lighting. You're being, like, oh, for God's sake, just turn on the light, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but if the buzzing of that light, you can kind of just feel that here.
Yeah.
In my own house, our bathroom fan, we just have like, we have a bathroom. We have a bathroom in our house and
Good
it
for
has a
you.
fan. I know,
Congrats.
isn't it great? And it has a fan and it is all like the light and the fan are all in, we have two anyway. One of the
Sure.
light switches, you turn it on and the light and the fan both go on. And it makes me crazy. Like I can hear it from anywhere in the house. I can hear that
Okay.
fan and I
Yeah.
can feel my own that means I can't handle something else, right?
Right.
Because I'm
Right.
so actively removing that buzzing
Sure.
from the information. So,
Well, well, and
yeah.
I think that also plays really nicely with the concept we talk about a lot, which is energy management.
Right, right.
So the neurotypical person, and I'll just add that 2 years ago I had a pretty like a moderate concussion. It was pretty
Right. I
significant.
remember, Anne. I remember. Yeah.
And normally I am good at like, oh, there's background noise, whatever. Let's just let it go, because whatever. But it got to the point where like my parents talking, I'm like, will you shut the bleep up? Like, of course I couldn't yell because then it would,
Yeah, yeah.
but it was
Yeah.
just like that gave me real empathy for, because my nephew, as he was going through puberty, really had a huge sensory like overload issue. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I get it. And I'm so glad for me that's temporary. But when you're managing your energy and you're like, oh, I have all these things I need to do, the neurotypical person isn't also adding to that list constant like actively trying to remove this
Yeah, like
other
there's a bee
sensation.
flying at your ear, right?
Yeah.
So you're trying to just do your little work, right? And there's a bee in your ear.
Hmm.
The
Yeah.
tornado alarm is going off, right? Like, and you're just trying to do your little work, but that is happening.
Yeah.
Um,
And not to mention, like I'm just trying to connect this to all the things we talk about, but
your stuff. Yeah, yeah.
that can so easily like we're honestly in a world like recent episode I had my sister Laura come back on and talk about complex trauma. Like so
Hmm.
much in the world is triggering us
Right.
and flipping on that fight or flight switch. So for like, oh, understand, like I think understanding that some of the sensory things in our world can actually trigger people and send them into fight or flight, even though but it's like anything, like, oh, that dude with the red shirt who reminds you of your grandpa is triggering you, but doesn't bother me.
Right.
Same thing.
Right.
That noise may not be triggering you, but it's 100% triggering me.
And you might not see it on my face, the experience that I'm having, right? So then you just
Mm,
come in to be like, Carolyn, can I get you to sign off on? And my response is, what? Right. And that
right.
what is not, in fact, really at you. It just is like, I'm so honed in on this that now this is a new, that you are like, not you, but your request is a new distraction. And I was
Right.
unable to then moderate my response to you. And now I've hurt your feelings, right? You know?
Yes.
Um, and so that like it can spiral, right? So I'm sorry, I'm
Sure.
trying to move my legs and then I'm shaking the table.
Oh,
um
okay. Yeah.
yeah, so it's like that information, the processing of the sensory stuff, right? So the smells and the eye, all of that. It's also the processing of information too, right?
Mm.
So um it seems like, man, everybody, I said it, so I told people, but even when you tell me that, if I have all of these other things that I'm trying to get rid of, I mean, think about if you read a book, sometimes you're reading a book that you even really enjoy, and then your mind wanders, but your eyes are still going, or maybe this doesn't happen to other people, but it happens to me.
No,
My eyes are
yeah,
still going over the words, right? But my mind has wandered because I've started to think about, do I need to bring the chicken out for dinner? Or, like, which chicken? Do I have chicken thighs or chicken breasts? And my eyes are still going over the words, but now I've
yeah,
thought about dinner, right? Like, I think that's a common experience.
sure,
It's not always a common experience for people in a meeting, but sometimes for
right,
neurodivergent folks, that is happening, right?
sure,
What was that noise? Did you hear that? Like, doesn't seem like anybody else is hearing,
right,
and so I didn't get it, like I have to go back and reread it. But if we don't take
yeah,
any minutes at any meetings, right? If there are no notes, there are no minutes, there's no
right,
recording. The only way that I can go back to get it is to ask somebody or wait for them to tell me that what I did was wrong. Right.
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 Interesting.
And so
Yeah,
then if that becomes a thing that I get penalized for because it seems like I don't listen or that I don't pay attention or that I
right.
don't understand but
So,
but the
yeah,
directions were not accessible to me and it didn't appear to you, you couldn't tell
right.
that they weren't accessible to me.
Well,
So
and like, so kind of good, like what I hear you saying, or what I hear what you're saying, and
with
then
my chicken anecdotes, no.
also, yeah, so I think that because folks who are neurodivergent already feel the stigma,
Mm-hmm.
they are less
Mm-hmm.
likely to go, "Hey, I'm sorry, what was that? I missed that
Right.
last part." You know, because then like, oh, that just reaffirms that I'm not paying attention or I can't pay attention. And now we're no longer on the same page.
Particularly when, whether in your current job or not, that has
Mm.
been weaponized against you over and over and over again. When every
Uh,
report card that you've ever had has said, doesn't pay attention, doesn't listen,
mm,
so it's like, if I ask clarifying questions, what that does is it draws to your attention that I didn't get it. So I don't want to draw that to, like, what I've learned, because I can see that you are hesitant to accept me.
hmm.
So I don't want to draw attention to that, right? So I
Right.
won't ask. So maybe I'll watch what other people are doing, which then makes me reliant on they're doing the right thing, which is not always the case.
Sure.
Um, or maybe, I'm then asking my peers and then I become annoying because the peers are like, why is she always asking me, what the directions? We all were in the same meeting, right? And so then
Right.
that becomes a thing. So kind of the processing of information. I myself, as a supervisor, was not always good about giving written agendas or giving written notes.
Sure.
Um, and then I had somebody on a staff that was like, look, this is what I need. And so I'm just going to start doing it. Right. So
Mm.
she would create now. I mean, she was probably managing me, right? But good
Sure.
for her, right?
Yeah.
We had that skill. So, but she was like, this is what I need to do. So I'm going to share my notes. So for
Sure.
her, the taking of the notes in it gave her,
Right.
addressed her focus in a different way, right? So she took these notes and then she would send them out and say, does anybody have questions about these notes? This is how I understood it to be. And we had a small staff, so it wasn't like she sent it to, like, the university
Right. Right.
board
Right.
of
Yeah.
trustees, right? It was like our little group of 5 or whatever, 4, 3
Sure.
or whatever. Um, but that really gave me some insight about,
Okay.
okay, so as the supervisor in this, how do I make sure that I have an agenda? Because I often felt like, I don't, man, we just need to connect. That's what we need to do, is we need to connect. So
Sure.
that's what we're going to do. But then I had folks on my staff who were like, yes, the connect, but what else is there? Like, what else do you
Right.
mean by that? You know?
Sure.
Um,
Interesting.
yeah.
Okay. Well, and like, gosh, this episode's so good for me. I mean, it's so good in general. No, well, because like when like you went through the Supervisor Strengths Institute a few
Yeah.
years ago,
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm.
And one of the things we talk about is we have to be continually coaching, and we need to set clear expectations, check in along the way, and hold people accountable. And we always encourage people to document and have like a shared document and have a running agenda, because we want everybody to be on the same page. So
Yeah.
when we're talking about, um, being trauma informed, or we're being we're being neurodivergent informed in our work. I think like everybody benefits from this. Like if you're, because if
Yeah.
you have a shared, like, oh, we've had a meeting. And again, like some people, like I have adaptability, which is not, I still am neurotypical, but that adaptability, I also was like, why would I have an agenda? We just need to chill and
Right.
connect and blah 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 blah
Right.
blah.
Man,
What's the
it's been
dizzle? Ugh.
busy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so which was great, but then I just realized, afterwards, and I was developing, stuff with Strengths University, like, yeah, but I missed out on so much because I wasn't putting in those opportunities to connect about upcoming projects or
Right.
reflecting on what we've already done or helping people specifically grow and develop. I was hitting 1 point instead of 5 points. And
Right.
so I think that if we're doing that and we're, because we're all so busy, like no matter what type of brain you have, it's being overloaded by the world right now and hard to keep track
Yeah.
of things. So if you
Yeah,
have
for
that
sure.
shared document, whether it be notes from a meeting or whatever that looks like for you, then none of us have to go ask everybody else what happened because if we had a ooh, what
Yeah.
kind of chicken should I have moment or
Right.
something
Right. Which would I think is, yeah. Yeah.
even more disruptive, we now have a place where we can all go and look and say, ooh, did I tell Carolyn that? And you can be like, oh my gosh, what did Ann tell me? It's in the same place for both of us.
Right. Right.
And then we can ask follow questions after that, but not feel that burden of, oh, I don't want to.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So, Anne, I was thinking, okay, so often in higher ed stuff, when I think about disability related stuff, um, we're very compliance driven model, right? So we have the ADA
Yes.
and it's a very compliance driven model. Everything that we do, there's a great book called Academic Ableism by, oh, hold on a minute.
Sure, sure. Move your sometimes I wet my plants
Yeah, I had to move that one.
sign.
Yeah.
That's
I don't
very nice.
remember. Oh my gosh. It's on the tip of my tongue and I can't remember. Oh man, that's embarrassing.
No, it's
I say
don't
it all
yeah.
the time. Anyway, it's called economic ableism. And essentially, it talks about, I mean, higher ed purposefully, intentionally, the point was to keep away those who like to identify the highly educated and the non-highly educated. I mean, to the
Sure.
point where early on and still today, there were things separated by like there are higher education institutions and there are asylums to whom we study, right? Right? Like, but
Sure.
there is this separation here. Anyway, so that's like the long time ago. Although not that long ago. And scarily, any maybe not the past anymore.
Right.
Anyway, but so if I'm sorry, now let me think about chicken. So that I let me go back to my calming thought about what I'm going to make for dinner so I don't panic. But we're very compliance driven, right? So the
Yeah.
laws around disability are compliance driven. But I think that that's how we train supervisors in higher ed too, is simply
Mm,
if we're training them in an HR way, what we're often training people to do is to fire people, right? Like we're
mm.
often training people how to fire people. And so that same language is keep a document, document
Sure.
all of their deficiencies.
Sure.
Um, I had a big with one of my kids' IEP meetings. I had lots of in the special ed world. There's lots of like documentation, show the evidence, bring the show the data, show the data. Yes,
Interesting.
but if the only data that you ever take are if the only data that you collect are
Sure.
data are
Against.
deficit
Yeah.
driven data, I'm not interested in your data, right? Like I'm not
Uh,
interested in you telling me how you fucked up everything, right? Like I'm
sure.
not now, this is me and my kind of mama bear sort of,
Sure.
like eh, that's irrelevant, right? What I
Sure.
need to know is like, well, let's document the things where things went well, and then I can learn from that, right? The
Interesting.
strengths related as well. Okay.
So even the term documentation is triggering.
It's triggering, right? Because you have that,
Okay.
and yet it doesn't have to be, but
Right.
this relational component with your supervisor.
Interesting.
So I have had supervisors who have been fantastic, right? I've had supervisors who have been like, look, you are really good at this and you are really not at this other thing. And so that's okay, right? Because
Yeah.
we need
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
like go into this thing that you're really good at. And
Sure.
you're going to need to figure out like how not to get caught about the things that you're not good at. You know,
Sure.
I mean,
Right.
I've had folks who have been really great at that for me. I've also had folks who have been really great at showing me where I didn't make the mark and
Mm,
just that's the only thing that I'm evaluated on moving forward. Right. And so it's like,
mm,
well, I don't know. I mean, the motivation to, I mean, at that point, then I'm just looking to get a different job, which is sometimes the point,
right.
you know?
Yeah.
Um, but man, wouldn't we be better off if we didn't like lose all of the institutional knowledge of things because we were
Right.
willing, both ourselves, to be like, you're right. I'm not good at that. And I'm probably not going to get good at it. Right.
Right.
But I need to figure out either how to, if I'm a middle manager, like I need to figure out how I rework that so that I have somebody on my team that is good at it. Or if it is me and it is a clear job function, I need to
Sure.
figure out, like, again, how I'm not going to get fired over it. Right. But it's not
Sure.
about, I need to figure out how I develop a structure or a routine so that I can like keep that moving, right, without
Sure.
losing track of it. For me, that's what I need.
Sure.
Um, I don't think we always teach our higher ed folks to do that, you know? And
Okay.
I don't always think that we have our employees in a place where we can accept that either, right? So I
Sure.
think that we often are in a place where it is about, I mean, there is this like neoliberal, how efficient are we? What more can
Sure.
we, how do you continue to do more and more with less and less? And how do we norm what is standard? Um, as though we're working with widgets, right? Whom we can just like turn up the dial and turn down the dial
Sure.
of their productivity, and that's just
Yeah.
not how life works. It's not how brains work. It's not how life works. It's not how diversity
Sure.
works. Um,
So, so you mentioned supervisors, like not
uh-huh.
really getting the training. So, what are some things that supervisors can do to, fix the help the problem, support
Yeah.
folks
Yeah.
so that they
I mean,
can be successful?
I really think of like the Brene Brown, clear is kind.
Yes.
I think about that a lot because I think that sometimes where people get caught up is that, like, I don't want to say that you're rude on the phone, right? Like, I don't want to
Right.
say that it's unprofessional that you do, like, I don't want to
Sure.
use these harsh terms, right? Um, harsh term, but like, I
Yeah.
don't, sometimes we don't even know what the real problem is, right? We're just like, we don't vibe. Like, what is that about? And so what I would hope that supervisors can do, and what I try to do as a teacher now, because I'm not a
Sure.
supervisor in that same way, is that I'm really trying to identify what is it that is rubbing me the wrong way or that isn't working, right?
Hmm.
What is it? And how do I talk to them about that? Because sometimes the person can give me some feedback about what will be better, right? So if it is that, now I can't think of any examples. Great, Carolyn, just totally blank.
Ah,
Um,
it's all good.
but if it is that, so I had a situation in a past job where I must have gotten snippy with a person, right? So there were, we're all kind of at the same level. We're doing different things. We're working on a joint project, and I can now recognize that I likely said, like, what, like in the example that I talked
Sure.
before, right? Or
Yeah.
no, I can't do that right now, right? I likely said it in a tone like that. I didn't hear the tone like that
Mm,
because I was asked while I was running from one thing to the next, right? And so I
sure.
didn't hear the tone, but it hurt the person's feelings, right? And so
Sure.
then I kind of got iced out, right? And I did not know what had happened.
Hmm.
So what I did at that point is that I talked to a supervisor, uh, our supervisor, to be like, yeah, I'm being iced out and I really don't know what is happening. Like, I don't
Hmm.
know the answer.
Mm,
Um, and the
interesting.
supervisor then, I think, did a little, was a good supervisor for me, right?
Sure.
Um, and helped me think through what I could have done there, right?
Sure.
She didn't really know what the situation was either, but then she did a little back recon, right, and figured it
Sure.
out, and was like, I think maybe you were snippy with somebody, right? Or bossy or
Sure.
whatever, whatever the things that women with ADHD get accused of being all the time, right?
Sure.
Too bossy, not in your lane. Yeah, I mean, all of these things, right?
Sure.
This is a song of my existence, but man, if the person had, if the person had, I'm grateful that my supervisor gave me the feedback, right? So that I
Sure.
could be like, okay, I'm going to watch that, because that's not the intent. Like, I don't mean to snip at
Sure.
people.
Sure.
Like, that's not the goal, right? Um, I also wish that my colleagues would have given me would have said, like, yikes, Carolyn, right? Because if my colleagues had given me that opportunity, we could have made it into, like, I could
Yeah.
have, and I did. I mean, I apologized, but I had to apologize about something I didn't know what I did, right? So then it's like, I'm deeply sorry for doing the
Sure.
thing that I seem to have done, but I didn't know what it
Right.
was. So
Well, and
sometimes that
yeah.
clear is kind is really important.
Yeah.
As a supervisor, it was helpful to me that she
Sure.
kind of de emphasized that some. We do a lot of performative professionalism, right? Where,
Mm.
like, well, you've hurt my feelings, but I'm not going to tell you what it's about because it wouldn't be professional. And it's like, no, just the professional, if our profession is that we're trying to help people and to make systems be better and to move people through, then we need to give each other a little bit of grace in doing that,
Sure.
and I think that sometimes we withhold that information, particularly if somebody rubs us the wrong way, or if we feel
Right.
like they don't get it, or if we feel like, or if we're kind of condescending and think like, well, they're just never going to understand. And so
Sure.
they're just never going to understand. So I won't give them the feedback. Well, how does that help anybody? You know,
Right. Well, and I think it's interesting that you had to apologize, but not your coworkers for icing you out with
I
absolutely
think that's interesting too.
no information, you know.
But, I mean, I just was supposed to know. And I
Right.
think maybe other people would have known, right? But I
Sure.
really didn't. I really
Yeah.
sincerely didn't know. And
Yeah.
even when I really did, like, I mean, even when I really did say, I don't get it, I got really limited information about what it
Sure.
was.
Yeah. Which
I
again
think,
goes back to the irony of, oh, those neurodivergent folks, they don't process the same and they don't
right,
communicate the
right.
same
She's
and they
not
don't
going to
get
get it.
it. But okay, well, you're also not communicating well.
Right. Not communicating with
So,
me. Right. I don't get it. So,
yeah,
and you don't get me. Right. Like,
right.
if my, like, what or no, was intent, like, was read in this, abusive way.
Sure.
Well, I mean, that's feedback I need to know, right? Like,
Well, sure.
that's
Yeah,
certainly not
yeah.
what I tried to do, but also that you wouldn't give me the benefit of the doubt, right? Of like,
Right.
yikes, got you before your coffee. Yeah, I mean, in a way that you
Yeah.
would another person that you just vibe with better, right? Like,
Sure.
where you might be like,
Yeah.
wowzer, crabby
Yeah.
crabs. So
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So, well, we've been chatting for a while and it's all been
yes, sir.
fantastic. Is there anything else you would add when we're thinking about how do we, because, we don't want to have separate sets of expectations and
Yeah,
different rules for accountability because we need to get the job done. But
yeah.
what are some, what other things might a supervisor either do or become more aware of to kind of stop some of this from happening?
I think believing the people that you're talking to and not always with an assumption that people are trying to get away with things. I think
Mm,
a lot of our policies, our employment policies, our policies for students, our policies, they are written in it with a neuronormative lens, right? And so
sure.
then when somebody says, "Hey, could I get the meeting recorded so that I
Mm,
can follow up and remember what it was?" And when our brain goes to, like, I don't want to record the meetings because I don't want people to try to
mm.
sue me. Like, I don't want people to
Right.
hold my words
Then they
against
won't
me. I
even
don't
pay
want to be,
attention in the
they won't even pay
meeting. And
attention,
yeah,
right? Like, we have all of these things of like, no, no, that's not how we're going to do it, because
right.
my assumed motive is that people are trying to steal, get away with it, like,
Sure.
whatever, right? And I think often neurodivergent there, that is not the motive, right? The
Sure.
motive is not that I'm trying to steal the information, that I'm trying to
Right.
um use it as blackmail against you. It really is
Sure.
like, I want to watch that one bit because I kind of don't get it. But I know that if I listen to it a couple times,
Sure.
I'll get it. Right.
Yeah.
Um, so it is this, but we all get defensive about things, right? We all get
Yeah.
defensive about like, you're right. I didn't make an agenda. And now I'm embarrassed that I should have made an agenda. Right. But if we respond in this kind of self-preservation sort of way, that's like
Sure.
nobody else needed an agenda. Um, who wins, So
Right.
I think the relational bit, which can be hard because we don't always get each other, but how
Right.
do we think well enough of one another? I think that that's a core component that I'm really trying in my teaching. And
Sure.
is this like, how do I really think well of people? Certainly there are students who write to me and say this, my grandmother died, that I'm not sure that their grandmother died.
Sure.
I don't care. I mean, I care if their grandmother died, right? But like,
Right. Right.
I don't need to like make rules that people are going to lie and tell me that their grandmother died. I'm going to give
Sure.
the grace regardless, right?
Right.
And it will work out,
Yeah.
Um, so I think that is part of it, is this, really trusting people. What would be helpful for you?
Sure.
It would be helpful if I could work from home twice a week, because when I work
Mm.
from home, nobody else is at my house. I can kind of set things the way I need it to be. And when our response is, but if I do that for you, I have to do that for everyone. But do you? But do you have to do it? Does everybody else have a documented disability that
Sure.
indicates this? Right. And if your response is, if I do it for you, I'd have to do it for everybody else that has ADHD, like if we're in that compliance related, like you have a
Right.
thing and here are the things that would be appropriate, without
Right.
using the human component there of what that is,
Right. Yeah.
we have to do better than that.
Sure.
So the clearest kind, trusting people that they know what they need. And then feeling assured enough to say like, but that's not going to work, right? Not your accommodation isn't going to work. Not, I'm not going to make information clearer for you, but just then making the assumption that like, I think maybe you just don't get it. Like you need
Right.
to give people really an opportunity to show that they can get it. The fact is, folks with ADHD, folks with autism are often really beneficial in helping us think through what our policies and processes are, right?
Mm.
Often really helpful in thinking about like, where do we lose students, like when we have to, when we're navigating 16 systems, right? They register
Sure.
this way, and like folks are pretty clear at being able to see like, here's where I'd mess that up, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
here's where this would, if it requires 3 additional logins and sign-ins, I'm not gonna do like, I
Sure.
know that is where it's the executive functioning is gonna just kaput out for me, right?
Yeah.
So often people can help us identify that in positive ways, but we need to give them the opportunity to it. And we need to not make them ashamed to tell us their solution, because
Sure.
their solution is based in their own identity and experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I guess one final thing for those neurodivergent people who are listening, what
hmm
advice would
hmm
you give to them?
Man, so I really read stuff, watch TikToks. I mean, all sorts of information about how your brain works. Not because the world is going to immediately change to accept your brain, because it's not. Like just as Ann and I talked about at the beginning in the 90s when I came out as queer, like the world did not immediately become like queer friendly, right? Like there,
Sure.
I have to navigate systems that are not built for me or my family.
Yeah.
And yet I have developed a language in order to do so, right? And in that same way, by understanding that system that they set up um, doesn't work for you, it's not about your failure necessarily, right? It's about a
Sure.
system that didn't consider you. And so that's really freeing, right? To think about, okay, number one, I don't have to take it personally that didn't work for me, right? Right. I don't
Yeah.
have to take it personally. Now I'm aware that I'm going to have to develop some structures so that it can work for me. Because if I, for example, don't ever turn in my paperwork,
Sure.
or, like if there are things that I do poorly, like I need to figure out how to handle that better. Um, but it's freeing So
Mm.
sorry, I have a kid walking through here, but he's not going to be on camera, but just enough to distract me from my thoughts. Goodbye. He walked through with like, honestly, like a pile of wiffle balls, right?
Oh,
So
very nice.
yeah,
Okay.
anyway, now that's all I can think about. One moment. So understanding that's really freeing, right? To think
Mhm.
it's not just that I suck. It's not that I'm
Right.
irresponsible. It's not that I'm dumb. It's not that I'm financially irreparable, right? It's that like, no, that is something that people with brains like mine is not easy for us. Now we still have to
Sure.
do it, right? We have to figure out some things. But man, that's freeing. And then to be able to tell other people, for
Ah.
example, I used to be terrible early on, and in the 18,000s, no, in the 1900s, though. No, I guess it was the 2000s when I first had student workers. I had to turn in paper timesheets
Ah,
on a certain
yes.
day at a certain time, and I had to bring them to a different look. That I worked at a music school. There were only two buildings, but I was the only one who worked in the other building,
Mm.
and so I had to bring it over. And I mean, I would forget every time, And so I
Yeah.
had to set it up, right? So I talked to my student. Now I didn't know at that time that was an ADHD thing. I just thought, man, I suck at this. I suck. I'm
Mm.
terrible. I should get written up. Maybe I should get fired. Like now people don't get paid. This is the worst thing ever. And so but then I had a supervisor who was like, you suck at this, and was able to say, like, man, why is this really hard? And it was like, man, I would get stuck in what I was doing. I would forget that it's Monday. It's not every Monday, it's every other month. And
Sure.
so what she did is that we booked a meeting on the calendar where I went to that place and met with her.
Ah,
And so then it was,
nice.
like she helped me to build in a system
Nice.
that helped me. So that early on job helped me to figure out ways to have that happen later
Yeah.
on too, right? So I was able to connect it with something else.
Sure.
Or like filling in timesheets, like when I went on vacation, sometimes you have to like log into a special system. And
Sure.
man, I know that I've worked at places that thought they were really helpful because they would send a reminder that says, don't forget to log into the system. And then they wouldn't like put the damn link for the system.
Oh, sure.
Come on, just put the link in.
Yeah.
Maybe there are other people that are like, well, you don't need the link. They told you you know how to get to it. But man, wouldn't it just be nicer if you just, I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's actually something that I'm good at when I have to have people RSVP or go through a program or go through, like I really kind of think through where does that
Sure.
crash and burn?
Yeah.
How to, and so much technology allows us access
Right.
in ways. I mean, in my lifetime, my
Sure.
professional lifetime, that has shifted so dramatically.
Sure. Yeah.
So
Excellent. So
yeah,
systems,
systems,
communication,
yeah, systems,
understanding.
communication, relationships, being able to advocate for yourself, not in a
Okay.
way that is like I have to burn everything down and everything's stupid, but like, look,
Yeah.
when we meet in that room, I can't hear what is happening.
Sure.
I can't hear past the construction vehicles or whatever.
Right.
Sometimes that happens. Um, and being, first of all, working at a place where it is okay to say, so could we meet in
Yeah.
a different room because it
Right.
bothers me in this way? And people aren't just like, oh, high maintenance Carolyn, right?
Mm.
Right.
Yep.
First, there is that. But then, like, being brave enough to do that, right? Because it
Right.
is just as we came out in the 90s and there were women who came out before us in the 70s who made
Sure.
it easier for us to come out being
Right.
queer. I mean, I feel like that same sort of neurodivergent stuff happens
Sure.
now, right? Too. So we
Awesome.
need to rely both on neurotypical folks to make systems better, but we also have to be able to identify what the needs are for
Awesome.
ourselves. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me
Yeah.
today.
Thanks,
And
Anne. I went on tangents. That's part of
no,
my,
no, no, that's all right. That's part
yeah.
of I assumed that would happen.
Yeah. I
Um,
imagine you did.
yeah.